Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge police are looking for a man who they say tried to abduct a 7-year-old girl not once, but twice. The Crown has appealed the acquittal of David and Colette Stephan, the Lethbridge couple who was found not guilty last month in the 2012 death of their son Ezekiel. We will explain why. And the federal election is less than a week away. We hear concerns from some of the federal party leaders.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Police are looking into a report of a young girl who says a man tried to abduct her on 2 separate occasions.
October 14th, yesterday, police responded to the home in the area of Mount Sumbers Way after a 7-year-old had reported that a male had attempted to grab her through a residential fence. Upon investigation, it was learned that approximately 6:41 p.m., 3 girls were playing in a backyard at the residence when the 7-year-old was approached by and a male attempted to grab the girl by the arm. The 7-year-old screamed and the 3 girls ran inside to tell their parents.
The man police say they're looking for is described as a white male, dark hair, a thin build, a tattoo on his right wrist with a gold ring with a diamond on his right hand. He was wearing a black hoodie, dark pants, and dress shoes at the time of the second incident on Monday. If you have any information that can help police, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. The Crown has filed a notice of appeal in regards to the Stephan case. David and Colette Stephan were acquitted last month in relation to charges of failing to provide the necessaries of life for their 18-month-old son Ezekiel, who died in 2012. Now, according to the criminal appeal filed on October the 11th, the Crown claims that Judge Terry Claxon committed several errors, including establishing a medical standard unknown to law, making comments in the trial that gave rise to reasonable apprehension of bias, taking into account irrelevant considerations, and placing the onus on the Crown to prove that the Stephan son would have been saved had he been taken to a doctor. The Crown is seeking a conviction or a new trial. In his decision, Justice Terry Claxon said the meningitis-stricken boy died from a lack of oxygen and not the infection. The Stephans were originally found guilty in 2016 of failing to provide the necessaries of life, but the Supreme Court of Appeal granted a new trial last year. The Alberta government is joining in on a class action lawsuit to recover costs related to the opioid crisis. Health Minister Tyler Shandro and Justice Minister Doug Schweitzer made the announcement earlier today. The action is brought on behalf of all provincial, federal, territorial governments that have paid health care and treatment costs related to the opioid crisis dating back to 1996. The provinces last year, there were close to 800 opioid-related deaths and 4,200 calls to emergency services in Alberta. In a press release today, the province also says it's committing $140 million to improving mental health and addiction care, including $40 million for opioid response. Around 4,000 treatment beds will also be implemented across the province. There are no easy answers when dealing with the opioid crisis. The CEO of Miracle Channel, Leon Fontaine, has some insight on how to tackle the issue, and it all starts at home.
In regards to the opioid crisis, I know it's a huge area and we could talk about a lot of things. Let me just mention one area, and that is our kids, our teenagers. It is not cool that teenagers and those going into university party with these substances. It's not funny, it's not cool, it's taking lives. There's a whole ton of risk. People often ask me, what did you do as a mom and dad, as parents? And I would have to say nothing really deep or wild other than a lot of time. Laughing, hanging out with them, having fun with them, not allowing our careers, not allowing the busyness of life to stop us from conversations, having fun, making sure that the home is filled with joy, filled with strong relationships. And if you've got a strong relationship with your teens, not just warning them, but getting out together, doing things together, living not just your life, but living in their life, knowing what they care about, who they're talking to, where they're going. We know through stats, it is much harder for parents to miss something going on in their kids, and your kids are much healthier as they discover the joy, deep relationships, and a lot of fun in the home, and know who their friends are. And we can put an end, at least in our families, to this mess touching us any deeper.
The very first downtown redevelopment project using the city's Targeted Redevelopment Incentive Program announced that they will soon begin construction. Ainsley O'Reilly discovered today how much of an impact this facility will have on future projects in Lethbridge.
So from a private investment standpoint, the downtown has not seen an investment of this size or magnitude in almost 20 years.
The historic investment is coming from 608 Health. The multifaceted healthcare company has put down nearly $5 million into the new facility, taking advantage of the city's new municipal tax relief program.
I think it goes into, following the public investment. The city has invested a substantial amount of money into the downtown through the park and ride, through Third Avenue reconstruction, and through tax incentives and other incentives like the Main Street program, housing program. So the city's put up money to say that it's important, that it's a vibrant place, and now the public investment's starting to follow suit.
For Mayor Chris Spearman, it's out with the old and in with the new.
Redevelop the downtown, take a look at some of the buildings that are here already, and how can we maximize their potential. So we have buildings like this that can be 50 years old and they can be given new life. Some are even older. We see this building and others as potential ways to revitalize the downtown.
The Targeted Redevelopment Incentive Program, or TRIP, is available for projects with a minimum construction value of $1 million. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
We are just a week away from the federal election. If the advance voting numbers are any indication, we could see a solid turnout on October 21st. A spokesperson with Elections Canada said we had over 2 million Canadians take part in advance polling.
Compared to the 2015 election, this is about a 25% increase. So in 2015, we saw about 1.6 million people vote at the first 2 days of the advance polls. And this number does not include any votes that were cast at Elections Canada offices or through our Vote on Campus program or any other mobile polls that we do run for the election.
To vote, people need to be Canadian citizens, 18 or older, and have proper photo ID. Now, across the country, Elections Canada hires around 300,000 people to help out on Election Day. The City of Lethbridge will be offering free transit service on that day beginning at 5:45 a.m. Make sure you tune in to Bridge City News on Election Day for your Vote 2019. Paul Arthur, Jeanette Roche, and I will have all of the results for you as they come in from across the country. Our coverage begins at 7 p.m. Now, there's been a lot of talk about a potential coalition between the Liberals, NDP, and the Green Party. Joining me now to talk about this via Skype from Toronto is one of our regular political contributors, Brian Lilly. Brian, first of all, let's talk about poll numbers and what a potential coalition may look like.
Well, the latest polling numbers are interesting, starting last week with Angus Reid and then with a poll that I published with DART. You started to see the Liberals slip below 30%. And that is a telling and disturbing number if you're in the Liberal camp, 28, 29%, depending on the poll. But several of them in a row went with the Liberals below 29%. Now, the Conservatives range between 32 and 34% across the various polls. That's still not enough for a majority government with the Conservatives, but it definitely puts the Liberals well outside of the even minority government territory. And why are they losing support? Well, whether it's Angus Reid, DART, Campaign Research, Ipsos, the NDP is rising. Jagmeet Singh is anywhere from 18 to 20% of the vote across a number of polls. And so, we can quibble about whether it's 18% or 20%, whether the Liberals are at 29 or 30%. Bottom line is, the trend line for the Liberals is going down, it's going up for the NDP, it's staying static or going slightly down for the Conservatives. So that at that point, you start to look and say, is there a coalition coming? That's the question everyone's been putting to the leaders. Nobody wants to admit to a formal coalition with the Conservatives, and Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says he would look to what Stephen Harper did, effectively, and look to govern on an issue-by-issue basis. And of course, Stephen Harper governed for 5 years in a minority government from 2006 to 2011, and he was very successful.
Now, on another note, the CPC launched a lawsuit against the Conservative Party of Canada. What is their statement of claim?
Yeah, this is one that is wrong on the optics and it's wrong on the law. What happened is the Conservatives put together an online ad, and it included, in a minute and 46-second online ad, it included 17 seconds of material from CBC, but it also included even more material from CTV, from Global, from Rogers, different reporters talking about or clips of Justin Trudeau, making mistakes, or talks of him breaking the ethics law, things like that. And CBC said, you can't use that. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One, the Copyright Act would say that this falls under the fair dealing provisions. And fair dealing says if it's for education, if it's for criticism, you can use small portions of a broadcast or a copyrighted work as long as it's not a substantial portion. 17 seconds of a multi-hour long program is not a substantial portion. So it's protected by the Copyright Act. It's protected by the Elections Canada guidelines for broadcasters and political parties that were distributed to all of them before this election and have been distributed to all of them. So CBC knows that this is a problem. People like University of Ottawa law professor Michael Geist have come forward and said, this is not an issue. This is CBC going too far, so they're going to have egg on their face over this, and they've also made two of their journalists who they named in the lawsuit look very bad.
BCN political contributor Brian Lilly, thanks a lot for joining me again from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer hit the campaign trail saying if he becomes Prime Minister, he would push for an interprovincial free trade agreement. He also had a warning against a Liberal NDP coalition saying life will become even more unaffordable for Canadians.
I do not believe that Canadians want a Trudeau NDP coalition, a government where Justin Trudeau may be the spokesperson, but the NDP are calling the shots, because that will mean massive new taxes. It will mean endless deficits, threatening those important social programs, because more and more of your tax dollar will have to go just to pay the interest on the debt, on the new debt that they would be racking up, making life even more expensive. The choice could not be more clear now. And there is only one poll that I pay attention to, and that is the one on Election Day. And I believe that given the choice between a Conservative government, a Conservative majority government that will get back to balanced budgets, leave more money in the pockets of Canadians by cutting taxes, and an NDP Liberal coalition that will run massive deficits, lead to massive new increases in taxes, I am very confident that the Canadians will give us a mandate.
Justin Trudeau says if his government is re-elected, it would come to the rescue of an abortion clinic in Fredericton, New Brunswick that could be forced to close due to a lack of funding from the province.
A Liberal government will always defend women's rights, including when challenged by Conservative premiers. That's something we know Andrew Scheer will not do. We will ensure that the New Brunswick government allows access, paid for access, to clinics that offer abortion services outside of hospitals. I will sit down with Premier Higgs if re-elected. We had very clear conversations when I was leader and when I was Prime Minister on ensuring that New Brunswick moves forward.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is pushing back against the suggestion that casting a ballot for the NDP is dangerous. Singh finds himself caught between a Liberal Party that says voting NDP is a sure path to a Conservative government and cheers Tories who are warning against a Liberal NDP coalition.
In Canada, our history is one where so many of the things that we're proud of happened when when people voted for more New Democrats. Our healthcare system was only possible because Tommy Douglas fought for it. The New Democrats and progressives fought for it. When we had changes to make sure that seniors could retire with dignity, pension and CPP and old age security, these were things that were brought in because New Democrats were there. So I'm saying to you, I want to be your Prime Minister, but whatever Canadians vote for come the 21st of October, I want Canadians to win. And so I'm saying to win, if you vote for New Democrats, we will fight in whatever form the government takes, whatever power the people give us, to make sure we deliver on the things that people need.
There are questions as to how two Canadian National Railway freight trains collided in Saskatchewan over the weekend. 3 crew members were injured following the accident, which occurred Saturday about 20 kilometers southwest of Melfort. The Melfort Fire Department said 2 engines crashed, but fortunately all cars remained on the tracks. Talks about Britain's departure from the European Union are ongoing. Now there's a discussion that a deal is still quite possible. We have an update now from EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier.
Our team are working hard, and the work just starts now, today. This work has been intense all the weekend and yesterday, because even if the agreement will be difficult, more and more difficult, to be frank. It's still possible this week.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said with or without a deal, the UK will be pulling out of the EU by the end of the month. Great to see the sunshine again today, but slightly cooler around our city. Double-digit temperatures are in the forecast for the rest of the week. Complete weather details are coming up. We had sun mixed with cloud again today. Tonight, partly cloudy with a low near 6 degrees. Tomorrow, just a few clouds developing with a high near 18. Thursday, more clouds rolling in with the mercury dipping slightly to 14. Friday, the clouds should clear out and we should see a high near 11. Saturday, partly cloudy with a high of 10. Sunday, mostly cloudy with a high near 11 degrees. Even warmer on Monday with a high near 13 expected. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 17 and an average low of 1. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1961 at 27 degrees, and the record low was a chilly minus 13 in 2001. Sunrise was at 7:52, sunset at 6:42. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Expect rain and 14 degrees in Victoria, showers and 13 for Vancouver. Clearing at 16 for Calgary on Wednesday. Mainly sunny and 15 degrees for Edmonton. Just a few clouds and 12 is on tap for Regina. Clearing and 13 for Saskatoon. Expect lots of clouds and a high of only 4 degrees in Winnipeg tomorrow. Showers and 12 for Toronto. Rain and 15 is in the forecast for Ottawa. Overcast and 16 in Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick should be mainly sunny and 15. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be partly cloudy and 17. Charlottetown, PEI will also have a few clouds and should see a high near 15 degrees. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 14 degrees for tomorrow. The new outlook from the International Monetary Fund is predicting weak economic growth this year since the 2008 financial crisis. The IMF downgraded its outlook from 3.2 to 3%. It says the change is mainly due to widening global conflicts, including the U.S. trade war with China. Its economic growth projection for Canada remains at 1.5% for 2019, but it has also downgraded its 2020 outlook to 1.8% from the previous 1.9%. A new report from the Canadian Real Estate Association says home sales in Canada advanced to September for the 7th straight month. It says sales were up 0.6% from August. Sales were up 15.5% compared to last year, mainly due to gains in both Vancouver and Toronto. The national house price for homes last month was about $515,500. That is up 5.3% from the same month last year. Google is expected to unveil a new Pixel phone, which will include an updated camera with an emphasis on artificial intelligence features. Google says that Pixel 4 will contain motion sensing technology that allows users to skip songs or turn off alarms with a simple wave of a hand. The new phone will also be able to be unlocked through facial recognition technology, matching what both Apple and Samsung offer. Uber is laying off about 350 employees from its food delivery, autonomous vehicle, safety, and insurance teams. The move is the latest in a string of staff reductions at the ride-hailing giant since its low initial public offering. Company officials said this would be the last wave of layoffs, which began months ago. Uber laid off 435 employees on its product and engineering teams back in September. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up slightly today to 16,418. The Dow was up 237 points to 27,024. The Nasdaq was up 100 points to 8,148, and the S&P 500 was up almost 30 points to 29.95. Oil was down 66 cents to 52.93 per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $2.34. Gold was up 3 cents to $14.81.10 per ounce. Silver was unchanged at $17.41. Wheat is at $215 per metric ton. Barley was also at $215. Canola was at $4.65, and corn is at $288 per metric ton. Live cattle was up 38 cents to $111.10. Feeder cattle was down 55 cents to $146.23. Lean hogs were up $3 to $72.13. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 75.78 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge police are investigating after a 7-year-old girl said a man tried to abduct her not once but twice. The first incident allegedly occurred on October 9th as the girl was walking home from school. The second took place yesterday as the young girl was playing with friends in the backyard at her home on Mount Sunburst Way. Police are looking for a Caucasian man with dark hair, a thin build, with a tattoo on his right wrist, and was wearing dark-colored clothing. If you can help out police with their investigation, call Crime Stoppers right away, 1-800-222-8477. The federal election is too close to call. Up next, I chat with U of L political science professor Dr. Jeffrey Hale to get his thoughts about who may become our next prime minister. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Blue Rain Ranch Animal Assisted Therapy Foundation Benefit Dinner and Auction is taking place on Saturday, October 19th at the Community Hall in Fort Macleod, with cocktails being served at 5:30 p.m. and dinner beginning at 6. Come dressed in your best Western wear and enjoy live music by Duo Grand Fiddle and Guitar. All proceeds to support access for low-income trauma and abuse victims to counseling and animal-assisted therapy. For tickets, call 403-894-9160. And for event details, visit bridgesofhope.com. Do you enjoy helping others in our community? Volunteers are needed in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat to support adults participating in local AHS recreation and leisure programs. AHS is looking for those who will provide guidance and encouragement to people taking part in aquatics, walking to wellness, and expressive arts. To learn more about this opportunity, call 403-388-6311 or apply online at albertahealthservices.ca. The City of Lethbridge's residential fall leaf collection program is underway from now to November 15th. Residents can call 311 Monday to Friday between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. to arrange for pickup. Leaves must be put in paper yard waste bags and placed in the area where garbage is normally collected. Paper yard waste bags are available for purchase at retail stores throughout Lethbridge. For more information about the residential fall leaf collection program, visit lethbridge.ca or call 311. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
It has been a very eventful week on the federal election campaign trail, and joining me now in studio to discuss it and dissect it all is Dr. Jeffrey Hale, political science professor at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome back to BCN.
Good to be with you this afternoon, Hal.
That's good. So, Dr. Hale, let's start things off first of all talking about the Justin Trudeau blackface or brownface scandal. Has it really hurt the image and the brand of the Liberal Party that much?
Well, I think it may have hurt the brand, but fair-minded people realize that even immature 20-year-olds can grow up.
Or 29-year-olds.
Or 29-year-olds, 20-somethings.
Right.
And the real issue on the ballot is, for good or ill, do you trust this man to run the country today?
Well, and that actually lends itself back to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. I mean, there have been other issues as well, which maybe have tarnished the Liberal brand.
And I think for people who are paying attention, these are issues of concern. However, as Preston Manning used to say, it's not just are you the perfect candidate, but in the eyes of the people whose votes you need, are you better than the guy you're running against?
One of the platform policies that the Liberals are campaigning on right now is more gun control. You know, and of course, obviously in the bigger cities like Toronto, where there's a real issue, more so with gangs than so much with the guns, but here in rural Alberta, you know, when you talk gun control and taking rifles away from farmers and ranchers, that really doesn't fly.
Well, I think this is symbolic politics for people who don't think anybody needs a handgun, but your point is well taken. If the police have to drive 50 kilometers to get to your house to give you some protection in the middle of the night, having some kind of weapons to protect yourself, or if you're a farmer or a rancher, your animals from predators, is part of what's necessary to protect your family. So we'll see what the Liberals come up with. The focus on assault weapons is probably more defensible than handguns, but we'll see how it plays out.
Now, the Liberals also announced they will not tax the first $15,000 of income, and the Tories want to lower the income tax bracket to 13.75%. They seem like very similar plans here. What are your thoughts?
They're relatively minor differences. I think there is a perception that there are a lot of people who are just getting by, living from paycheck to paycheck, so this will make a difference at the margin. If you're paying taxes already, the Tory proposal, well, if you're paying taxes already, both proposals will provide you with a small amount of help. If you're one of the third of Canadians who file tax returns that don't pay taxes yet, it's more symbolic politics than anything else.
Affordable housing seems to be a real issue as well. When a lot of the candidates are going to the doors and campaigning, they're knocking right now. Do any of the party platforms have a leg up on this one to get voters' attention?
Again, this is symbolic politics, but the reality is that both what the Conservatives and what the Liberals are proposing have the potential to increase demand without increasing the supply of housing. That will push up prices, and the regulatory changes that are needed to increase supply are generally within provincial jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction. So they're trying to appear responsive, but a lot of the people who look at the numbers suggest that this may do as much harm than good.
And speaking of the numbers, according to the recent polls, it's really tight, especially in central Canada, Ontario and Quebec, between the Liberals and the Conservatives. And across Canada, could we potentially see a minority government?
It's possible that we could see a minority government. However, I think the media has done a massive disservice to the average thinking voter by looking at national horse race numbers. We don't have a national election. We have a whole bunch of regional, in many cases sub-regional elections, because the patterns of party competition vary hugely across the country. The 1 or 2 point spread in the polls reflects a 40-point spread in Alberta between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Liberals are well ahead in Quebec, but those general numbers mask very significant differences in the sub-regional numbers in Quebec. There's a big difference between Montreal, where a yellow dog could get elected running as a Liberal, and suburban Quebec City, which leans more towards the Conservatives. And I think the big difference will be in the suburban areas of Montreal, which are traditionally nationalist. They're overwhelmingly French-speaking, and the Bloc Québécois could actually come up the middle there and take a number of seats.
How about in Ontario? A lot of seats in Ontario, a lot of big battlegrounds. Rural Ontario may go Conservative, maybe the bigger centres, Ottawa, Toronto, Liberal. I mean, what are we looking at there?
Well, there was a poll in the papers today, even with small sampling, that showed the Conservatives running fourth in the city of Toronto, but being competitive in the GTA, the suburban belt around metropolitan Toronto. And so those races and who turns out and who stays home will make a tremendous difference.
What about the Atlantic provinces out in the Maritimes? Is that still strong Liberal territory?
I think the cities, by and large, are, although the Conservatives might be competitive in one of the St. John's, Newfoundland ridings. However, in New Brunswick, you have a provincial Conservative government that has recently been elected. A lot of the traditionally English-speaking ridings in New Brunswick, which have gone Conservative in the past, many of those people are running for election again, so they're known quantities. In Nova Scotia, the Conservatives are competitive in a number of seats where longtime Liberals like Scott Bryson have stepped down. And in Atlantic Canada, individual MPs, like lots of small town Canada, individual MPs, individual candidates make a lot more of a difference. So if a long-term incumbent has stepped down, a seat could be competitive where it wouldn't be otherwise.
How about Newfoundland and Labrador?
That one's harder to tell. The Conservatives in Newfoundland have not been close to the Conservatives federally since the days of Danny Williams, so it's hard to see where the Conservatives would pick up much support there.
Now, Dr. Hale, are the Tories a lock here in Western Canada? I mean, we can say yes for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, I'm assuming?
Well, again, you have Winnipeg, and you have the rest of the province.
Right.
If you looked at the results of the recent provincial election, downtown Winnipeg was NDP. The University District elected a couple of Liberals. The suburban areas voted fairly solidly Conservative, although there were some close races.
So Flin Flon, Brandon.
Flin Flon and Brandon
Thompson.
will be Liberal or NDP. Flin Flon and the North will be NDP.
Oh wow.
Or possibly Liberal. The southwestern part of the province, including Brandon, will be solidly Conservative. So again, provincial numbers don't make up the whole story, where you've got a significant urban, suburban, rural divide.
Now, British Columbia is interesting. Tell me a bit about that.
The interior, again, will lead Conservative. The Fraser Valley probably as well. Where it gets interesting is where you get into Greater Vancouver. The Conservatives are competitive in suburban Vancouver ridings with large Chinese Canadian populations. They're not as competitive in areas with large South Asian populations. And you could see 3 or 4 party races in some of the suburban ridings going up the Fraser Valley.
Let me ask you a bit about Ontario again. Do you think that Doug Ford cuts, all the cut really hurt the Conservative image in Ontario, even federally?
I don't know how much it was the cuts and how much it was Mr. Ford's ham-handed management style. People like people will accept sacrifice if they think it's being done competently and fairly. Doug Ford is an albatross on the Tory brand in Ontario.
If we see a Liberal minority government on October 21st, do you see maybe either the NDP or the Green Party propping up Justin Trudeau and the Liberals?
I think it's more likely that they will support the Liberals than the Conservatives. The question is how many bloc members will be elected and how will that play into the results?
You know, what's interesting as well is there was a recent survey where talked about the amount of fundraising that was done. And apparently the Conservatives federally raised twice the amount of money as the Liberals. So if there was a minority government and another election, the government fell, another election was called, the Conservatives could afford another campaign where the Liberals could not.
Well, that may play a role, although the Conservatives' big challenge is to expand their pool of second choice votes. All the polling data that I've seen suggests that for the Liberals, the Greens, the NDs, they are one another's second choices. The Conservative second choice pool is limited to a relatively small proportion of the Liberal vote. And that polarization is something that Mr. Scheer and the Conservatives are going to have to figure out, because right now it's not working to their advantage.
What about the advertising? You know, a lot of the advertising from the Conservatives seems to be slamming and putting down Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. He's not as advertised. He was never ready. Is that negativity a negative on the voters as well?
I think where you have a competitive negative advertising rate, it has a tendency to depress turnout, because there are an awful lot of Canadians who are not strong partisans one way or the other. So the more negative your ads are, the more they may reinforce your core supporters. They may reinforce people who might be thinking of voting for the opposition, but this gives them a reason for a second thought. However, those people can just as equally stay home. Last time we had a big jump in support or in public turnout between 2011 and 2015, especially among young people. It's quite possible we could see a much lower turnout this time around.
You know, a lot of the constituents I've spoken to as well, they say, you know, I'd rather hear what you offer as a candidate as opposed to what the other guy's not offering. That's what they're saying about Scheer and Justin Trudeau. But it seems like even the Liberals are having some of that negative attack style ads right now.
Well, running against Andrew Scheer is a little bit like running against the Pillsbury Doughboy. So you have to connect him to other Conservatives who have a little more of an edge if you want to run negative ads. That's why the Liberals have been trying to tie Mr. Scheer to Doug Ford, who, as we've said, has a pretty poor public image in Ontario right now.
What about the Liberal health care plan compared to the Conservatives? What are the fundamental differences?
There's not a huge amount of detail in either one. The Liberals are talking national pharmacare, maybe, but it depends what we negotiate with the provinces. For the provinces, this is an old story. The federal government wants to buy change. The first question of the provinces is, this is a lot of money. We already have healthcare systems that are fairly stretched. How can we count on you to follow through on that promise over the long term? Because we've seen cases in the past where the feds have made promises and then have not delivered after an extended period of time. So the capacity of both levels of government to follow through on those commitments becomes critical. With the Conservatives, they're saying we will continue the path we've been on and that the previous government has been on for the last 15 years or so. We will promise you stable increases in funding. If people want you to spend more money on filling the gaps in drug benefits, then that's something to be worked out between provincial governments and their citizens. And there is something to be said about that. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic, it may be more sustainable.
Several parties have made major promises when it comes to climate change. It's a real hot button issue right now. Retrofitting buildings, doing less fracking, no fossil fuel power plants, no more pipelines. That doesn't sit well here in Alberta. Do you think that would actually resonate with some of the voters here?
There are the pragmatic, incremental things that can help people do a lot of little things that over time can make a difference. The splashier the promise, the more it involves taking people's jobs away, and that's harder to sell. It's the Green Plan to shut down the oil sands over a relatively short period of time reminds me of the Russian plan to redistribute the East German economy eastwards. Right. And so, given the fact that provinces own and control their resources, to say, for a federal party to say, we're going to shut down the biggest industry in a province is inviting a constitutional battle that is reminiscent of what Mr. Trudeau Sr. walked into in the 1980s, and it just about tore the country apart.
You know, we're seeing some of the battles going on right now with Jason Kenney, our premier, vowing to fight C-48 and C-69 in court.
Well, that's what the courts are for.
Right.
And he may win or he may lose, depending on the quality of the arguments that he makes. Simply generating rhetoric won't do it. You have to show where in the Constitution, based on what precedents the federal government has overreached, and you have to do your homework. And if the province's lawyers have the capacity to do so, they may knock a hole in the federal government's case. On the tax issue per se, as opposed to the regulatory issue, it's going to be harder for them to do so.
Jagmeet Singh, federal NDP leader. He's got a little bit of pizzazz. He's wonderful turbans, great colors, good-looking guy. He's actually younger than Trudeau. I think he's 40 years old, same age as Andrew Scheer. But do you think the federal NDP would actually be further ahead with Tom Mulcair still as the leader, as opposed to Jagmeet Singh?
Well, Mr. Singh's election has changed the landscape for the New Democrats in terms of their achievable voter support. And unfortunately, this speaks to some of the cultural divisions within Canada. I think there is fairly widespread acceptance in English Canada that we are a multicultural society, and the community that you're part of, the God you worship, should not be relevant to your running for public office. And some people are better at that on both the right and the left than others. However, in Quebec, they don't have a policy of integration of immigrants. Bring the best of your culture, be a fully participating member of society as somebody who is, for example, both Sikh and Canadian. They are much more into the old-fashioned melting pot style of assimilation en français. And so Mr. Singh is facing a very strong cultural gap. Mr. Mulcair was building on the success of Jack Layton, being the center-left party of choice in Quebec, and that was part of the reason the Liberals have shifted as far to the left as they have. With Mr. Singh's background and making the Toronto and Vancouver and other major city suburbs the battleground of choice, that's a whole lot harder to sell in Quebec.
Political science professor from the U of L, Dr. Jeffrey Hale, thanks again for joining me in studio.
My pleasure.
Marriage can be difficult at the best of times, and even more so if there's been some form of infidelity. Does this mean that the marriage is over, or is it possible to restore and rejuvenate the relationship? Joining me now to discuss this today is Tina Conkin, a conference speaker, director of Relationship Lifeline, and author of the book, How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Tina, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's been a few years since I've been on Bridge, but it's good to be back.
How is it that people in good, happy relationships end up cheating?
Well, good happy has to be described. I believe that quite often, and this is my belief, when we come into marriage, we come in with all of us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, every part of us. And so as we bring things into our marriage, we don't know really what's going to trigger during our relationship. And so even though it seems normal, you seem to have the normal problems that most couples have, and so you keep putting it off as that, there are times where it just falls apart even when it's good.
Can you tell me what happened in your own marriage that led you to write this book?
Yes. So we were that typical good marriage. We were marriage counselors, as a matter of fact. We worked in the counseling field and we helped a lot of families. I was even a children's pastor. My husband was an associate pastor for a long time. And then we broke off into this area of helping the hurting and really helping relationships regain. So how regain momentum, regain love, regain fun. And here we were, in the middle of that, helping others, and we fell apart. And that's when we realized that unresolved baggage from your past comes back to haunt you, honestly does. And so we were in a time that we'd never experienced before. My husband was the fun, loving guy. There was never anything but a good day. Just because you were alive was a good day for him. But he went through a period when his mom was diagnosed with cancer that he didn't know how to deal with that. He'd never really dealt with deep pain. I came from more of a dysfunctional home, and I'd had a lot of moving in my childhood, some bullying. Not him. He was like, the best case scenario was his deal. So the first real pain that he experienced was experiencing his mom's death and not being able to engage in it. So I saw him withdraw. I saw him not be himself. And that's when I discovered I didn't know how to be there for him. I didn't know what to do except telling him, you don't have a choice. You need to just go to the hospital and see her. You can't just hide. And I was more the obligation person because that's how I grew up. You don't do what you do what you have to do. And so that's sort of when we started going downhill. And how does a good marriage get in trouble? You ask your close friend to help you out. And you say, listen, you know what it's like to have lost parents. Can you help him? Can you talk to him? And during a painful time, they connected emotionally.
So how long did it take to restore your marriage? Now, this isn't something that happens overnight, does it?
No, it's not. And from the time I forgave, which was pretty quick, just because I'd experienced the value of forgiveness for myself, I knew that wasn't going to be a choice for me, even if I didn't know the outcome of the marriage. And so from the time forgiveness happened, it took us 2 years to make it better than it ever was before.
So how do you actually go about forgiving this kind of thing? Is it an ongoing process?
It's yes and no. The forgiveness part was a decision I made because I realized that even if the marriage didn't work out, I didn't want to carry that with me. And so forgiveness was really something I did for myself. I had to see that neither one of them, and for my benefit, I was able to see through the eyes of compassion. I was able to say, neither my friend nor my husband meant evil against me. This happened. And I think for most people that have been betrayed, if you could just focus on that first, did they really mean to hurt you, or did maybe boundaries get crossed? The Bible says flee, and you didn't. When temptation hits, you're supposed to flee. You're not supposed to walk away. You're supposed to run away. You're supposed to go with all your might. And there's a reason for that. And to my husband's credit, he was really passionate about explaining that after the affair. He said, listen, even if a feeling feels good, you're already in the flee zone. Get out, So if somebody gives you a compliment and that feels good, get out of there, because the enemy will build on that. And so that was very powerful for us to learn that it felt like they weren't doing anything wrong, but feelings. And that's where a lot of, these Facebook affairs happened. And it happens pretty innocently quite often.
Now, Tina, it's one thing to forgive someone, but it's another matter entirely to develop trust in your spouse again. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, that question. Okay, so that haunted me because at the very beginning of our healing, that was the question my family had. That was the question that best friends had and people that loved us. How will you trust him again? Okay, so you want to reconcile, you've forgiven him. Great. How will you trust? And that plagued me and it was haunting. And I'll be really honest, I never trusted again. I don't believe in trust, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that for me, what happened was a miracle. I remember it was about 2-3 weeks where this question of trust was very haunting. And I went to church. And at that time, I was going to Victory Christian Center here in Surrey. We lived in Vancouver with John and Helen Burns. And I attended a service by myself. I sat in the very back row. I didn't want to see anybody. We were 2 weeks out, so the pain was real. My husband wouldn't even go to church because of the shame. So I went by myself, and I remember Pastor John stopping in the middle of his message and going, I don't know who this is for, it has nothing to do with my message, but here's what I've got to say to you. God never told you to trust people. He said, trust God and love people. And I walked out of there without even listening to the rest of the message. And I said, thank you, Jesus. That was a message that came straight from heaven. My responsibility is for us to let love conquer at this point. But my responsibility is to trust you, God, with my heart. I can't trust another human with my heart or my life. That is God's prerogative, and I was able to do that. I was able to say, no matter what happens, no matter what evil is set against us, he will turn it to good. And so I had to really make that conscious decision and to this day, I live that way, even with friendships, and I've said to friends, if I came to you and said, I've been hurt in friendships before, so, I really need to trust you that you're not going to hurt me. That's putting such an expectation on you to do right by me. And that's just not fair. So in our marriage, we really decided to start developing safety and building boundaries around our marriage and healing from our past, because so many things we had dragged into our marriage from the past, I dragged in that I couldn't be there and be nurturing, because I'd been hurt by showing nurture. And I didn't ever want to be hurt like that again. And I talk about that in my book. I talk about some of the vows we make as children. And then we bring it into our marriage. I promised myself I would never get hurt again by a man, right? And that was how I protected myself in my marriage. I just wouldn't get too close.
Is it possible for a relationship to be stronger after infidelity? I think about when I broke my arm once, and then my doctor says, once the bone heals itself, it'll be even stronger than it was originally. So is it possible to be stronger?
It is so possible. It was for us because we had to really look at ourselves. And one of the things that I've been criticized for is taking responsibility, because one of the big things I ask myself in the book is I say I've had this mirror moment, with God, where God says, stop being a victim and ask yourself what part you've played in that and what part you've played in this. And so people are taking that to mean that I took responsibility for his affair or her affair. I did not. And I wouldn't want anybody listening or seeing this show to think that anybody should take responsibility for another person's sin or wrongdoing. But I took responsibility for what led up to that, because that was our marriage. We were one. What was going wrong in me that wasn't able to be there for my husband when he needed me? And I had to really look at that. And so, yes, I didn't know that about bones can be stronger. But that's great. I'm going to use that because I didn't know that. But yes, our marriage was much stronger. You know why? Because we filled the holes. We filled the fear. Our marriage was no longer built on fear of it being destroyed or on fear of being hurt. It was built on trusting God and loving each other.
So what are the first things a spouse should do after finding out that there's been an affair? Are there maybe good and bad ways to respond?
Well, we have been running personal intensives for marriages for the last 25 years, and our program is called Relationship Lifeline. And people can get help there. They can read the book, of course, and there's lots in there. And I give a lot of tips in the book of how to get through the first 24 hours, how to get through the next week. But the first thing is, if you're a believer, trust God that He does not mean this for destruction, and He can take this and make it better than it was before. And we've developed a program called the R3 Factor, and we really take you through a process of healing. The first being the R1 is really to reveal. You can't change or heal what you don't reveal in yourself. I had to see what was broken in me first, and what was broken in me went back many years before I got married, and I brought that into my marriage. And then the R2 is really, you can't change what happened in the past, but you can rewrite the story. You can rewrite the story that's written on your heart. You were not created to be a failure. You were not created to feel shame. You were created to be in the love zone. That's what we were created. So I teach about living above the line where there's love, and under the line is fear. And quite often we live in fear. And so it's looking at being able to rewrite those things that were meant to destroy us. And then the third, of course, is the most fun part, and that is the renew. And that's what we did. When we renewed our marriage, it was better than it ever was before. I didn't know two people could be that intimate emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, in every way. And when I lost my husband 5 years ago, I lost half of me. I lost the man that completed me really here on earth. But because I, again, go back to trusting God, I am complete in Christ.
So how do you protect your children when you're going through the process of restoring a marriage, Tina?
Well, that is something that I really want to speak to very strongly, because at the end of the day, when God said to me, don't you be a victim, it's because as an adult, we are not victims. Children are. And a lot of the things that I work with couples is make sure that when you're having, we used to call it my crazy time, that you at least care for your children. And there are many crazy times during that 2-year period. And what I would say is be guarded for your kids. So don't try to not fight. Don't try to not expose. Don't try to not be in that reveal process. But somehow, with every fiber in you, think about them. They're the innocent ones. They're the ones that, so set times. Maybe they're in school, right? Maybe you take fight nights and take it out of the house. Maybe you take those times where you set, because, if you think that you can just get over it, you can't. Get help. But in all of that, maybe it's about taking the kids to the grandparents for a weekend when you need to just get it off your chest. We had to do that. We had to take times where I could just release a lot of the emotions that were inside me. A lot of nights were spent crying after the children were in bed, but we built rules of engagement in our home. And those are so important. And that's why I say get help, because there's a lot more involved to you healing than just you. And you're the adult. You don't have to stay a victim. The children now are victims, and they don't know what's going on. And they shouldn't have to know every detail either.
You offer couples retreats for those struggling in their relationships. What do they actually look like, and do they actually work?
They do work. And, we work with some of the biggest churches in Southern California and Canada. And right now, we still, after 25 years, have a 90% success rate of couples getting back together that are separated or in crisis mode. So when that reveal process happens, I can't even explain to you how much healing happens. And why are we different than most couples conferences or couples, people say it sounds too good to be true, so it can't be true. It's so true that we're willing to give you your money back if it doesn't work for you personally to heal. Not all marriages make it, but they will all personally, as a person, learn how to heal, and they will heal, because it's your heart that needs to heal, and we don't deal with the marriage as much as we deal with your personal heart. Jesus said in Matthew 19:8 that divorce was allowed because of the hardness of the heart. So why do I have such credibility and faith in what we do? Is because we take what Jesus said, it wasn't so in the beginning. So if the hardness of the heart is not meant to be there, and that's what causes divorce, then let's look where the hardness of the heart came from. And let's put our faith that in Christ, if we trust him, he'll soften our hearts, because we give our heart to him, not to a spouse or a friend, right? We give our hearts to him, and in that way we can heal.
Amen. Tina Conkin, author of How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver, BC.
Thank you for having me on.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.